You might absolutely, get some sort of thing happening in like 5 years, but it'll take you a while, right?
I know England has really started moving on that. Like if you say something nasty on Facebook and you actually threaten someone, you'll have the police show up and they'll throw you in jail for the night. Like, so I think they're almost trying to make examples of people to try to curb the behavior.
Well, I think online harassment has become such a major part of discourse that affects people's lives that, you know, there are, sort of changes waiting to happen, but I think a lot is going to be required to go from here to there.
Yep. Yeah, because I was always like, I don't know, I'm not an absolutist, but I always kind of lean towards less law, more freedom. So I was against, I can't remember the bill C something or the other. But after watching what's happened in kind of the Canadian political algo, I actually think they do need to do more with it. Like I think I might be for that bill now.
Well, I mean, one of the interesting things is you have a lot of increasing sort of investments that have been done with regards to this sort of stuff. So looking at like the expenditures being made in policing, there's a lot more that's going into cyber. So cyber crime is a much more serious thing that's being taken into consideration, not just from like an online harassment standpoint, but also like identity theft,
Oh, yeah.
a huge amount of scams that are, increasingly coming in, and these have real financial consequences that can affect people's livelihood for long periods of time. So.
But I think the cyberbullying is really kind of opening up a new thing because, obviously bullying's always been something that's happened with human beings, right? It always has, it always will. But with the internet, people can kind of do it faceless and information seems to pass faster. So like it's a whole lot easier for someone to make, say, a baseless claim about someone else and then kind of rally support. And so very quickly you can see it going from what would have happened in like normal life where you might have got a couple of friends to agree to like literally hundreds or thousands of people. And they're very quick to kind of jump on the harassment bandwagon. You know what I mean? Like whether it's leaving, like one of the big ones I see is if someone's kind of got like a public facing business or job, you'll get like thousands of people running and kind of leaving messages and kind of pushing to get them, fired from their job or, if, I don't know, they're a real estate agent trying to ruin their business. And a lot of times it's totally baseless. Like, I guess I'm kind of for it in one sense. Like if it's based on fact, like, I don't know, you bought a car and you got totally ripped off, then that's kind of like a good use of this behavior, letting everybody else know, people condemning that behavior, and kind of protecting other citizens from, being taken.
You dab it, don't drag it. Push it into the skin.
Validate the information we get.
They're calling Danielle Smith Maple MAGA 2.0. They're calling Danielle Smith.
Well, I think increasingly, especially if you are judging things by market terms, a problem with that is what happens if profit maximizing activity may not necessarily be good in general. What if there's some sort of negative externality of there being some level of defamation? Let's say it makes you a lot of money to effectively defame somebody, right? If you have real financial incentives to spread hatred against whether it's an individual or a group of individuals, if you're benefiting financially from the spread of hatred against a group or an individual, but this is not something that is good for society at large. The costs to society are far greater than the economic or financial benefits you individually are gaining. Is it that different from a case where someone's playing particularly loud music that disturbs their neighbor's sleep? Or if somebody is, mining some sort of materials that are affecting the oxygen quality of their neighbor? Or if someone's cows are eating, stuff on the other side of someone's fence?
But when we think of like the whole monetary thing, we now live in a society where the amount of viewers or followers you have technically has a monetary value, right? So like in this kind of attempt. So at one time, You know what I mean? Like it would be very easy to say, well, you're not a business. If a couple people don't like you, that's not really, defamation, for example, because there's no financial impact. But now we live in this society where the potential that you could have had a large following, which would have created a monetary value, and the amount of followers we have technically does have like this monetary impact to us. One could almost argue the entire thing now is monetary.
Yeah.
And that really, like, to me, that confuses the law because it's never really been like that. Like, how many friends you had, I don't really ever think, like, I can't think of any time where someone could have used that as a legal argument for monetary issues, like any form of monetary issue. While as today, like, I think that could be argued, even if you're really a nobody, because one could argue that you would have become somebody had they not done whatever it was they like, because it's just so unknown. We don't really know who's going to become famous. You can become viral overnight, right?
So I think especially when we're looking at these sorts of things, weighing costs and benefits is important, right? So, if we're looking at the damage that's done by, by a stronger set of defamation laws, for example. Let's say it's easier to, get outcome X or outcome Y. What are the costs of doing that? Like, does this mean that, an additional amount of resources in the criminal justice system that might be being used for something else in criminal cases, or frivolous sort of cases in civil cases? Could this mean sort of a grinding up of a legal system that might otherwise be put to better uses? Could it be instead, a cost in terms of just like efficiency? Maybe these are decisions that are best sort of made between individuals, and getting other parties involved might actually be something that reduces value for society, right?
Mm-hmm. Like something I've always been fascinated with is, America's always been known for this like crazy, like they're always litigating, right? Everybody litigates everybody. You got to be super careful. While as Canada, I never really got that impression. And I knew that there must be some legal aspects to it, like differences in our law, but I always presumed it was more like of a cultural thing. And so, like, am I right or wrong about that? Is it actually the legal framework difference between the two and precedent, or is it more of a cultural difference? And do you think that, like, this whole kind of society now putting so much value on followers and that kind of behavior, could that potentially move us into a similar kind of scenario as America when it comes to constant litigation?
That's a very interesting question. So if we're looking at what makes us as litigious as we are, and what makes the U.S. so litigious, and why are they more litigious than us, and why are we less litigious than they are? I think part of that may come down to culture, and you're right. But I think there's another aspect of it that has to do with maybe the likely outcomes in certain cases. So, for example, in the UK, for example, if you win a civil case, oftentimes you are entitled to, like, whatever you've paid in legal fees, you're, like, whoever you were suing, they're going to have to pay your legal fees as well.
Because that's considered damages at that point, is it not?
No, but it's just considered part of the process in the UK, whereas that's not the case in the US. Right? So so let's say that you have to spend.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I assumed that was like across the board, really. So then basically they have this huge dilemma that, yes, you'll win the court case, but if it doesn't guarantee your legal fees, if it's too expensive to fight it, well, then you're actually going to be in the negative despite winning.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are differences that you can see from that sense, right? So that's a big difference. So I think that can, sort of partially go through that, because if you are able to effectively scare off your opponent under conditions of uncertainty by making it much more expensive for them to beat you, then if it's a war of attrition and you have a bigger war chest, you are more likely to get justice done if justice is what you can afford and they can't. So I think that's probably a part of the game.
Like, I know I can almost speak lawyer to myself, because every time I contact my lawyers, it's always like, yes, 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 but it's not worth it, or you can't afford it. Or like somehow my lawyers always talk me out of ever doing anything legal, which kind of leads me to believe I've got very good lawyers, but that's just an assumption. That, or I actually listen. I don't know. Maybe they're lazy lawyers that don't want my money, because typically they don't even charge me for telling me that that's really stupid and don't do that. So I do get the feeling, at least here in Canada, most lawyers, because I've had the same answers from multiple, is litigation is absolutely not worth it unless you absolutely have to.
So, I mean, the majority of cases are settled. So most cases are not litigated in Canada. So, the vast majority of cases are settled, actually, even in the US. So litigation is important when something has to actually go before a real court. And under those sorts of cases, being able to make arguments persuasively is really important. So a firm that's I think their literal website is litigate.com. One firm in Toronto is called Lesner Slatt, and they specialize in litigation. So a similar counterpart in Montreal is called Woods. And they do the same thing. So you have these sort of boutiques that specialize in litigation, and they're quite good at what they do. But this is not typical in practice for the majority of firms in terms of what the majority of lawyers do. So,
but part of their secret, if like, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of their secret is, generally speaking, they would never take on a case unless they're pretty confident they've got a chance of winning.
Actually, no. It's more a question. Sometimes